Everybody, to our webinar today on the topic of business analytics and business intelligence. It's part of a whole series of webinars organized by the British Academy of Management, and this one is also supported or provided by the British Academy of Management Continental Network. My name is Anna-Maria Klaus. I'm with the University of Applied Sciences Zwickau in Germany. And I'm very pleased to introduce you to our two panelists today. So we have Chris and Christina. Christophe Larocque is a professor at the same university I'm currently working for. So he is in business computing and focuses on process management for manufacturing SMEs. And he's also an expert for big data analytics and simulation. Our second speaker is Dr. Christina Phillips. She is a senior lecturer in business analytics at the Liverpool Business School, Liverpool John Moore University, and her research focus is more on human-centric analytics and also the application of analytics and participative design in operations. So we'll have two presentations on the acceleration of digital transformation in our society in general and in business. And then we will move on to a Q&A session towards the end of our webinar. So feel free to pose your questions through the Zoom Q&A tool, which you can find on your screen. And then I'll select a few for our discussion at the end. So yeah, now without further ado, I'll hand over to Chris for his presentation.
Thanks, Anna. And first of all, welcome also from my side. I try to start the presentation and share the slides as well. And so hopefully this works out and you can see it quite well. Sorry for the populism that would make data great again. I couldn't refuse. However, yeah, I'm professor for business computing, and so maybe I'm coming a bit more from the technical point of view, at least with the research projects we are doing here in Zwickau. However, I try to, of course, stick to the business processes and business applications, and I try to do these next, let's say, 8 to 10 slides really with a non-technical perspective. So if it looks too easy for you, then it's right from my point of view. So yeah, I want to talk a bit about business intelligence, business analytics, and basically about how data-driven decision might support. And I guess from a general point of view is what we see due to this COVID-19 crisis is that the digital transformation accelerates. I see lots of companies bringing in all what they have on working with Teams and Zoom, and you see all the webinars going around, a lot of virtual meetings, virtual conferences. Yesterday we got the mail that probably this year the BAM conference will be in the cloud. And from one perspective, I'm really happy and looking forward to the things that come. On the other hand, of course, we have to do it right, and this is basically the same for setting up systems for data-driven decisions or data-driven decision support. First of all, maybe just one sentence to my background. What is business computing? Well, basically it was invented so that the economists and the computer scientists could talk to each other, at least if both talk to a business computing guy. So you could say that we know a bit about everything, but nothing in deep. So I sketched this slide once again about the topics that I'm covering to some aspects, though in some of the points you probably find some really specific experts that know even more, of course. But maybe to know a bit about everything and to help the people to talk, to discuss, to find common solutions is not a bad thing. And of course, one of the latest buzzwords that we are sticking on besides big data analytics, Internet of Things, and Industry 4.0 is the word of the digital twin and the digital shadow of these IT systems of manufacturing sites. And in our research projects, we are trying to set set these things up and to explain to the people and companies, especially manufacturing SMEs, how these things work. In the title of the talk, it was like business intelligence versus business analytics, and from one point of view, you could say this is basically the same business. So it's about taking decisions and considering data for it, and of course this is correct to a certain extent. On the other hand, if we dig a bit deeper, then we know these basic 4 steps of data analytics that you see on this slide. And from a more technical perspective, maybe Christina could discuss this later on, but from a more technical perspective, we know business intelligence as a business, also for business computing, since years, where we collect data from point of sales data, from marketing, but also from manufacturing sites. And what we do is basically to create some dashboards, scorecards, some automated reportings, and to allow some data exploration for the marketing guys within their marketing reports, for the controllers within their reports, and all this stuff. And what we consider as business analytics is to turn around, not only look in historical data, so to say, but to try to predict in a way what probably might happen if, and this is important to say in these times, the system itself keeps more or less stable. Because most of the predictive analytics stuff that we discussed today, if it's predictive maintenance in manufacturing or other aspects, is that we try to learn in a way from the historical data, and by this forecast what is a reasonable behavior in the future. So, for example, we try to learn that if a certain sensor behaves differently, that then after a while the machine will have a breakdown. And after learning this and using the same mathematical functions and statistical modeling, then we are able to forecast and to hopefully to prevent these machine breakdowns if we talk for predictive maintenance, for example. So business analytics for us is looking in the future. As long as the system keeps stable, then all this predictive stuff is quite enough and works in most cases, or at least in some use cases, pretty fine. And we use basically statistical analysis in a more or less sophisticated way. So if it's automated, then sometimes we call this machine learning and artificial intelligence and all this stuff. The second part is, if we now have a valid forecast of what will probably happen, then of course we want to reuse this data and open our minds to find some certain points where we could change this, what we could do, what we should do. So to basically calculate, simulate, optimize some what-if scenarios and all this stuff. And in the data analytics community, this is called prescriptive analytics. We know this as operational research and simulation and optimization. So these are the methods that are that come into play here, basically. And with this, we could do some quite interesting stuff. To start simple, I just brought you a couple of screenshots. So this might be an example of a typical descriptive analytics dashboards where we see where we could report on sales according to specific months, according to specific products, to specific regions, and by this we could filter, we could drill in, as we say, and try to gain some knowledge about how the market has behaved and which products were good, had good sales, and which products loosed up, so to say. If we look in this area of diagnostic analytics, then typically we already use some statistical tools, for example, to find patterns in groups and to also automatically look for similar groups of products that behave in a certain way, that follow the same seasonal seasonal behavior, for example. And this is basically all about looking in gathered data and try to gain some knowledge on it. If we now look in this predictive prescriptive stuff, then, for example, simulation comes into play. I'm sorry that the screenshot is in German, but it basically is a very basic Excel spreadsheet where you calculate the value of a new product in a very, very easy way. And what we could do here is to change the calculation with mean values, for example, so for the cost per piece, or for the market volume and the sales price. And we could change this from mean values to some probabilities. And what we see is that when we use this kind of Monte Carlo simulation, that with, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes more work, we really can come up with better decisions on specific innovation projects, and see if this really comes and brings some value. And this, from my point of view, is one thing that is really helpful to come to better decisions. And what we see in these days is that most of the companies, especially manufacturing SMEs, are now facing a situation of huge uncertainty. And during the last week, for example, I had a phone call with a CEO of a small manufacturing company. And he only sees the sales drops dramatically, and he wanted to know that what happens if, for example, in the year 2020 we only have 50% of the sales. What happens when we have 80% of the sales next year, or if we have 90%? Where's break even? And all these calculations could be done relatively easy with some basic functionalities of Excel and maybe a bit of simulation to really very fast find some good pathway through this uncertainty. And after that, we came to a decision what to do next and where to focus. And so again, I saw in this small case that the use of these data-driven methods and the use of some very similar or simple simulation methods really might bring some value. So this just as one example. Of course, in the area of IoT and Internet 4.0, Industry 4.0, we also have in mind some larger projects like smart factories, like autonomous factories. And if we look on these pictures that are generated here, then we see lots of stuff like the digital twin, like traceability, like preventive and predictive maintenance, that basically rely on available data on these manufacturing sites, and some algorithms and analytic functionalities that work on this data to come to these smart factories and to bring them into reality. One aspect that is often missing but is very important in this case, this is a slide from SKF in Sweden. The next slide was that we also have to bring in the humans in these systems, and that there's some kind of not only technological readiness but also some kind of organizational readiness. But this is something that I would like to leave to Christina. That's why I skipped the slides here. This is a picture that me of my team pictured about what we are doing. So basically, we have a setting where all of the things that we have in a factory and in the world all around are becoming smarter. Basically, everything has a sensor, and there's a lot of data hanging around. And our idea is to make the most of it. If we do it with some analytics, with some machine learning, with simulation or simulation-based optimization, if we do it by visualization of these reports and charts, I guess the data is there, and it would be stupid not to make the most out of it. And the methods are there, and the approaches are there, the ideas are there. And the good news is that also the tools that we need are there. This is the so-called big data and AI landscape. It's from 2018, and what you see, of course, you cannot recognize every picture and every brand, of course, but basically it should only say that there's lots of tools, infrastructure. So the IT is there, and we need to use it in a proper way to find good solutions and to navigate and to help the companies navigate in the future. This is the baseline. And just a hint at the end. One of the reasons I'm a fan of analytics and data-driven, at least decision support, is that I think that really, from my experience in the research projects as well as from the consultancy, that we come to better management decisions if we really consider the data that is already there and try to understand it and try to use it in a proper way. And the other thing that we see, especially in the SMEs, is that if we don't rely on data and facts and figures, that often we come to these HIPPO decisions that are pictured on the right side, where HIPPO is just the acronym of highest paid person's opinion. So in the end, the person decides who has the highest salary, which not in every case might be the best decision, because sometimes they are a bit away from the operational processes. So this may be just as an introduction, and I would like to maybe share some other experiences regarding to your questions that Anna will moderate. And so, Christina, now from my point of view, it's yours to step in.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. Hopefully this will take over nicely from where you've left off. So
I think it was a good bridge from the technical part, and now we can bridge the divide between the technical and this social considerations.
I love it. That's just such a great link.
Thanks for the flowers, Anna.
Beautiful, Anna. Right, let's go on, slideshow. Come on, you can do it. Hang on a minute. Yeah, there we go. Brilliant. Right. Okay. Bridging the divide, as Anna said. So my work looks very much at the human-centered design of business analytics. And I have a slightly different take from Chris that I see when business analytics gets used by people, it gets traction in the organization and it actually becomes business intelligence. But in order to do this, we have to cross this social and technical divide. And hopefully I can give you a bit of a flavor today of some techniques that are being developed to help us to do this. So designing analytics for business intelligence. We need design. Why do we need design? So this is a paper from Richard Vigden and colleagues from the European Journal of Operational Research, which was brought out a few years ago. And it's really looking at the connectivity between all these different things that have to come together in order for us to actually get good business analytics. One of the things I noticed, I actually did my PhD within an industry, in a company, trying to improve their supply chain. And that's where this whole idea of human-centered design of analytics came about. And I noticed that if without culture change, you couldn't get people to actually use the analytics. Without good data, you couldn't do analytics. And quite often the good data came from the people who were doing the work, who needed to use the analytics. So it's almost like a chicken and egg situation. And this cultural change and cultural shift was really important in getting traction in the analytics. So this picture really spoke to me when I first saw it, which is actually towards the end of my PhD, but I'd been through this pain, so I really understood it. So it's a co-evolving ecosystem, is how Vigden put it. And of course, there are lots of stakeholders and there are a lot of experts. And we cannot underestimate the importance of the subject matter expert when it comes to our analytics and how to do our analytics. If we have a large scale system, we have lots and lots of data, we've got automated systems, say an AV car system or a robotic system in an industry, it's easier to just use the data and to use the data. But when it comes to the other end and it comes to interface with a person, that's when we actually need to understand how the person uses it. And quite often the subject matter expert will be the one who says, oh yeah, the data says that, but I know what it really means is this. And it's that information that we always need to make sure that we also have on board when we do our analytics. Sorry, I'm just going to move this because I'm actually over my words at the moment, so I can't see what I'm doing. So there are lots of material systems as well as human systems, like computers and data storage. Now, the humans will change the computers and material systems, and the material systems will change the way that the humans behave. So this co-evolution is both social and material. There are often a lot of human systems that we have to overcome. The organizational culture itself, then there's cultures within different social groupings. There are different points of view. And there, of course, there are the powerful players. There are the people who might instrumentalize anything that you do, and then they make the hippo decision, which fits really nicely. And often these multiple systems intertwine. So we have to kind of have some sort of empathy as to how they're fitting together. And this is why we need to start bringing in soft operational research techniques and problem structuring techniques. So this is a technique called the business analytics methodology. It was created by Vigden and Hindle a few years ago. And it was basically to say, how can you help companies to leverage business analytics? Now, what they did is they linked up business modeling. So they used the business model canvas and soft systems methodology to help a company to say, what is it that we do? What do we want to do? Where do we see ourselves being as a business? So what does our business model canvas look like? And then where does analytics fit into this business model canvas? Of course, during this process, because you're actually having the opportunity to get together a group of people from across the company, usually you find that things become opened up during the process. Things can change during the process. So you need something like soft systems methodology to guide you through that rather than being very ad hoc about it. Another thing that's quite useful with this sort of work is things like imagining ideal futures through things like design thinking and stuff like that. Yeah, there are a lot of different methodologies that you can bring to bear. They grow the analytics structure from looking at the business model canvas. And the soft systems methodology allows you to look at all of the political and social aspects, as well as looking at the, this is a technique, a hard technique that we can use, and have we got the data for it, and is the data right, and, you know, bringing the subject matter experts in to talk to the data as well. So I've just put a note in there that's Hindle and Vigden from 2017, if anybody's interested in looking this up. I think somebody was talking about strategy, and I think this might be interesting to them. So this is where human-centric analytics comes in, and this is my work. Human-centric analytics is not a technique like business analytics methodology, it's a design paradigm. It's basically saying that if you're in a situation where you have very high human involvement and a lot of complexity, then you actually need to involve your human users in the development of your analytics from as early in the process as possible, through as much of the process as possible, in order to gain buy-in, to gain traction, to enable the learning that needs to take place, so that it can actually embed the analytics where they're needed most. Of course, this is not a quick process, and it can be very difficult, and it does require a certain level of humility on the part of the business analyst. But then it also requires a certain level of humility on the part of the subject matter experts who want the analytics, because they don't necessarily know which algorithms are going to work for them. The business analyst will. So I recommend that if somebody's going to do human-centric analytics, then they lay it on the table from the start that this is what it's going to do and this is how it's going to go, so that everybody is bought into this process. So it's a method to interface analytics applications with the users and the producers of the data. It was developed in a complex environment. Maybe it goes beyond that, but I have yet to find that out. That's something that I'm working on at the moment. The main key is that there should be high human involvement throughout the development of the analytics. So I did this in an enterprise, and basically every time we tried to put analytics in place and we didn't involve human beings, they didn't gain traction and they didn't work. They needed a lot of extra work on them, which actually cost us money. Obviously, I'm a business analyst, I'm not cheap. And it basically took us longer. Whereas when we involved people from the beginning, right the way through to the end of the process, the analytics got traction, they were the right analytics for the job, and people started using them, and they learned how to use them, and what we saw was a culture shift. So that's how it took place. This is from a forthcoming paper that will be out in 2020, hopefully. So, as I said, human-centric analytics itself is not a methodology. So I developed a methodology to go with it, simply because what I found was that there were so many methods out there that it was actually difficult to say you should use this, or you should use this, or you should use this. I would say that basically human-centric analytics is just about interfacing the analytics with people. You use whichever tool helps you to do that. But you are going through a process which I've described as the SPEAR methodology. Now, SPEAR could be used on its own, but I think it's really more to help you to find the direction that you need to go in. So what you're doing to start with is you're structuring. You're structuring the implicit knowledge that's in people's heads, and you're structuring people's perceptions of the situation. You're bringing these subject matter experts together with people from different departments that have different ideas about how things should work. It's looking at the behavior and the perceptions around this problem space. The problem space itself is ill-defined. We're talking about complex environments, so it is ill-defined. We do need a large amount of empathy, and we need a lot of free will to be put into this. But we also have to structure the empirical knowledge. So there's a lot of data there, but what does the data say? And does the data say what people think it says? And is it actually recording the situation as people think it is? So are these things aligned, or aren't they aligned? Through this process of exploration, we can emerge a bridgehead of direction of change, or a bridgehead of this is what we want to develop, this is what we want to be able to see. Once you get to that point, then you start to say, but what would stop us from being able to get that? This is very much like the business excellence model. Where do you want to get to? What's stopping you from getting there? If you look at the resistances after you've done this structuring process, then you're more likely to have the blue sky thinking of, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And rather than going, oh, we can't do that because, we can't do that because. So you're looking at it from a more positive perspective. You look at the resistances. The resistance help you to be creative in overcoming it, in finding ways around it, in finding ways that you can get what you want without having to sort of like just completely throw it out. Once you've got to that point, if you've done this properly, you should find that it's then very easy at the end to co-evolve a steady state of analytics. So you've got the analytics that you need in order to do your job. So for instance, in my place, it was particularly improving the way that the forecast was used within the company. And we also started looking at level loading through using simulations. So, you know, we did various things. So that's just a general landscape of how you could do human-centric analytics. And of course, other methods can fit into this. So you can use soft systems methodology, perhaps to look at these perceptions and to bring this empirical evidence together. You can use things like design thinking to say, you know, where do we want to go? What do we want to see? So there are a lot of different methods you could fit into this. It doesn't have to be used on its own, and it's not as a step over other methods. So another method that I used to catalogue what people were doing was the Mangle in practice. So the Mangle of practice is actually a social theoretic view of science. But what it says is that science is not, sorry, I won't look at it from the science point of view. I'll look at it from the supply chain point of view, because this has already been looked at by Richard Allrod in respect of operations research, to do with developing things, how things change each other. So how material things change the behavior of social things, how social things change the behavior of material things. A little bit like structuration and structuration methods. Sorry, structuration theory. So Mangle in practice, you can use a Mangle in practice to catalogue and study the process of change that's taking place while you're doing your business analytics, while you're doing your human-centric analytics. It's important to do that because I find that my personal experience was that the company didn't really catalogue what was happening as they were developing the analytics. And yet if they had, there's a lot of doubling up that they could have gotten rid of, because they would have known the best way to go about developing those analytics in that situation. So if you use something like the Mangle in practice to catalogue what's happening, then it allows you to say, well, ooh, we had something like that, we could do this here. So what you want to catalogue is what's the emergent structure and how is it changing the actors involved in the situation? Is there a bridgehead of agreed change emerging? So this would be as you're bringing together your empirical structure and your human structures, how is it changing? How are they agreeing to move forward? when they hit the resistances, how do they change that? What new knowledge do they need to bring in to say, well, we could do this, we could do that, and we can't do that, but we could do this? How is that happening? How is that emerging? And then what needs to take place to fill in the gaps? Who also needs to know about this? Because if so-and-so doesn't know about this, this isn't going to happen. So that's just a very quick run through of human-centric analytics. From this, I developed a philosophy, and I think the philosophy really speaks the most of how this stuff needs to be done. And you can throw any method at it as long as you can do it in this way. So ontologically, we're talking about a dynamic human-machine data system. And the design of this needs to evolve over time, and it emerges from a fairly reflexive yet structured interactions. So there's rules and there's knowledge. So things like soft systems methodology, we need to use that because we need a strong structure to allow us to explore. If we go in there just ad hoc, then we have no structure, and mistakes can happen, and we can't do the same thing the same way twice, which means we can't study it. And also a company can't repeat it. So it's also bad from that point of view. Epistemology, from this point of view, we're looking at structuring the implicit and the explicit knowledge to create a mutually agreeable level of abstraction. The thing with when we're putting things into analytics, we actually need to gain a certain level of granularity so that we can actually, or a heuristic, for instance, but we have to know what is the acceptable level of granularity. At what level does somebody understand how a forecast is done? So for instance, weekly, monthly, is it transactional? If it was transactional, what would happen? So people don't necessarily, I mean, a lot of people doing forecasting are not necessarily people who've been very highly trained in forecasts. So they may not understand how it affects their forecast if they try to forecast on a transactional level, for instance. They don't understand the difference between looking at things at weekly data or looking at things at monthly data, and what difference that makes to what kind of forecast they're going to end up getting. So that's an example of granularity and getting this mutually agreeable level of abstraction. And this can then be used in the analytics software or developed into analytical solutions, because every computer, there is a finite size that we have to go to, and we can't run things forever and ever and ever. If we want a quick solution, we need to aggregate, for instance, what effect is that going to have, and is that acceptable for the human beings involved in this? And finally, from a practice point of view, we're looking at a decentered, iterative evolution of artifacts. So the business analyst is not the most important person in the room. The boss is not the most important person in the room. The most important person in the room is whoever's doing it at that moment. And it might be the software is the most important thing at this particular point in time, because it's the software that's saying we cannot look below this level of granularity or it will take too long to run this, for instance. It should be knowledge that's generated through a mutual endeavor of learning. And so we all have to be a bit reflexive, and we all have to participate, and we all have to understand the other. Asking quite a lot of people sometimes, but this is where things like soft systems methodology, understanding the politics of situations and the powerful players, is actually very important. So that's a quick whiz through human-centric analytics. Now, analytics during CV19, which is what we've come here today to discuss. As Chris has alluded to, predictive analytics is going to be limited in times like this because there's a shock to our data. If you suddenly got demand has just dropped off a cliff and you don't know what's going on, or in the toilet roll case, it went sky high and then came back to normal again. How do you deal with this? Because that's going to really alter your history. So when you do something like forecasting, you forecast on that history. How can you do that? You would have to take chunks of history from previous, and then you would need your subject matter experts coming in to tell you what was going to be the best bit of previous history in order to focus on, and things like that. So your forecasting will have to be judgmentally adjusted, and there's going to be a lot of ad hoc heuristics involved in this. Simulation is the go-to tool at times like this, because with simulation we can say what if. When there's huge uncertainty involved, it's actually possible with simulation to have a production manager, for instance, say, oh, I don't know, but generally it's between here and here. And we can use that. We can actually use that in our Monte Carlo simulation. We can use that in our simulations to actually say, well, in that case, this is what we would see. we can say if we add this many processes together, what's likely to be our end product of variability in the time that it's going to take us to make this. If we put this much product through, what's our profit going to be next year? Or will we have to up our margins on this? Yeah. So simulation, you're getting a lot of that today. Participative simulation and simulation generally is used extensively in healthcare. So I know that there's a lot of interest at the moment in healthcare in using simulation to, for instance, predict the amount of beds required, predict the amount of people who are going to be coming through CV-19 stations. I think from our point of view, from supply chains, it's more going to be a case of how do we get people to be happy about coming back to work? And how do we get people to be happy about coming into our stores and buying our products? So I put a couple of papers up here. I know this is recorded, so you guys can pick these up later. One of them was very kindly passed on to me by Chris, which is from Simeo, looking at healthcare modelling to help decision making during pandemics. The other one is a paper which was brought out very recently in the Journal of Simulation to look at how simulation can be used at times like this. And they, I think, are looking at it particularly from a healthcare point of view, but I'm sure that some of you could take from that and actually say, well, okay, but in this context, maybe I could use it like this. So I recommend those papers. Now, human-centric analytics and CV-19. So how on earth do you do something which actually requires a lot of people to come together and talk to each other when you're in a time like this, when people can't actually get together and talk to each other? Okay, we could do webinars, we can come together like this. Difficult to keep track of. There are some computing tools we can use, but perhaps we can also look at gamifying a digital twin. So maybe we can make digital twins of companies, of warehouses, of offices, of town centres, which is what I'm particularly looking at. And perhaps we can look at how people behave within these environments and look at the unexpected effects, and also look at what it is that they want and what they require in order to get back to normal economic levels, to normal economic activity. So I'm looking at possibly using digital twins to design information flows in a human-centered way. What do people want to know? What happens when people are given access to certain information? So the chap who's working for NHSX, who are putting together an app, which is going to be doing contact tracing and telling people where the contacts are, have said today that they know that there are certain things that are going to happen that they cannot predict, because this has to be done in an iterative and evolving way. And I think this very much speaks to where HCA is at. We know that when we involve humans in something, we are going to have to look at iterations of design, and we are going to have to evolve end designs. So we have to be very careful about how we do it. Digital twin gives us the opportunity to do it in a very safe environment because it isn't the real world. So a tool to observe behavior in new world settings that moves beyond the psychology experiments. Although the psychology experiments can inform what we're doing and help us to do that. The idea being to maximize individual agency, hoping that we can then gain buy-in from people, we can gain ownership, but we also find out what they actually want and what they will do when they get what they need. The idea of using decentralized information flows is a really good idea because it becomes much more robust, and it's also you're more likely to get behavioral fit for that particular area. And I know this is something that in Europe they've been moving much more towards in certain countries, and then in the UK they seem to want to do it centrally, but we'll have to see what happens there. So I'm going to be working with Slingshot Simulations, as they call themselves the world's first simulation as a service provider. This is one model that they did looking at automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles, layering up the different aspects of it, including the pedestrians and the human users of it. It's working with a chap called David McKee from the School of Computer Science. We're hoping to work with local councils to produce digital twins of city centres. And hopefully we can sort of safely experiment in that environment and see what happens. I'm going to finish up quickly here because I know we want to get onto a conversation and a panel discussion. The idea being collaborative design in a safe environment, but more rapidly than perhaps we would go through with normal human-centric analytics. But we are still evolving the solution. We're having high human involvement from the beginning. We are maximizing the amount of agency that people are able to have, and we're not imposing normative assumptions on the whole thing. And that's the most important part. It still remains HCA. I'm also working with these guys from Liverpool John Moores, plug for one of my projects. So thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to some of your questions.
All right, thank you, Christina, for the insights, and also Chris, of course. I think we can take away a couple of points to talk about, and we've already received some questions. In fact, already this morning there were a couple of emails pointing us towards some interesting things to discuss. So I believe a good one to start with is about your point of view regarding business analytics. So we have a question concerning your points of view. So Christina, you talked about human-centric analytics, and Chris had more of a coding or a technical standpoint towards business analytics. And the question is whether you believe that there is in fact a divide between those two points of views, and what's your opinion, which one is thriving, which one is developing in which way? So maybe you can give us some hints in that direction.
Yeah, maybe I could start, because I see the larger difference between data analytics and what we nowadays call data science than between data analytics and business analytics. Though I assume maybe at least my standpoint today was maybe a bit more from the technological perspective. What I call data analytics is basically just a set of tools, methods, where we try to prepare to gain some knowledge out of the available data. Of course, this only makes sense when you have the concrete business case, use case, and business process in mind. So I know that there are, especially in large companies, they are setting up specific groups just focusing on AI, just focusing on data science, and sometimes there are really some people in there which are very strong in coding and have no idea about the business process. And I guess maybe the role of some business analytic guys is what Christina stressed a bit more, is to know about the tool set on the one hand, but know about the business process and the business case on the other hand, and to bring these worlds together. This is, from my point of view, also a good job for at least some of the business computing guys that we are educating here at the university. Of course, this has the disadvantage that for me personally, I could say I'm not the best coder in the world. There are a couple of guys that are able to produce much larger, much faster Python scripts, and however, if there's a person that knows how generally to work it out and to know the business process on the other hand, and allows this discussion and brings this the business people, if it's from management, if it's from the shop floor, that really are experts on the process, and facilitate the discussion on this, and then I guess the role might be beneficial as well. So I would make the difference between data analytics and data science, but this is just my point of view.
Mm-hmm. All right, Christina, anything to add?
I really do agree with Chris there. It's I don't actually, I think, you know, this is what I was saying at the beginning. I kind of think it can all be intelligence for the business once it's being able to be applied in a way which actually aids decision making and aids a process. But it can't get to that point in the first place unless we bring in the subject matter experts, we allow them to influence what's happening and the change that's going on, and to some extent to actually influence what data analytics are actually being done. So I don't take the view of the analytics being separate from the business case and the human beings who are part of the organization. I actually take something called a hylozoist view, which is basically that they are almost seamlessly one. We often see them as being very separate things, but actually when you see them as separate things, then they're no use to each other. It's only when you bring them together and you actually see them as one system that you really do get the traction and the leverage from the use of the analytics and from the very clever people who can use those analytics as well. So it is really important to bring those people together, and we can't all be brilliant coders. I'm not that brilliant at coding. I can write a basic R script and I could do a bit of neural networks, but I'm not brilliant. But on the other hand, I think maybe the one thing to add is, I think the part of the reason why the business analytics methodology has come about, why the paper by Vigden recently has come about, why I've been writing papers about human-centric analytics, is because we actually need methodologies that help people who are data scientists and who are great coders, but don't do the human side of things. We need to give them frameworks and structures that can help them to become good business analysts wherever it is that they work. Because sometimes they don't have a whole team of people around them who can help them to do that social side of things. So they do actually need tools to help them to do it. So I think the more that we start writing about it, the more that we start putting it out there and helping them with these techniques, and also perhaps teaching more of it on courses as well, then the more likely we are to be able to bring these two things together to get more traction from analytics.
Yeah, I agree. So basically, we also have received a couple of questions concerning the use of data analytics in general. So first, like, what problems do you think business intelligence and business analytics can solve? There's also a question more concentrating on the current situation with COVID-19, whether you think that it can help to assess the impact on business from a social point of view, economic, and also technological implications. And the last bit you were referring to, Christina, also concerns one of the questions that talks about the strategic and operative level of the whole aim of data analytics. So it would be interesting to get your point of view on those three aspects.
Shall I go first this time, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm in danger of repeating myself, but I think at the moment, as I said, things like forecasting, you can only forecast on, for instance, what did the demand look like before CV-19 hit? But then you need lots of subject matter experts to say, but will it go back to normal? Will it be the same as it was before? At that point, really, a lot of tools of predictive analytics and data mining actually fall apart because they rely on good data and they rely on consistent data. And what we have is a shock to that data system. So in that case, we need to actually think about, we're bringing in that subject matter expert together with that analytics, and probably resorting to simulation, because simulation is about the only thing that we can actually say, well, if the situation was like this and we've trained parameters in this way, what would happen? And I think simulation is probably the go-to tool at the moment. In times of great uncertainty, it's probably one of the best to actually use. And as far as the sort of interlacing these things is concerned, I would go back to the idea of not only human-centric analytics, but also the business analytics methodology, and design thinking, I think, is also a very powerful tool at times like these to help people visualize where they see things going, perhaps what they see are the problems in their particular business from what has happened, how they think they could overcome it, or just to visualize where they would want to be, how they would want to see their business operating if it was operating, for instance, more web-based all the time. Where would they see it be? What would they see it as being? How would they need to change their product? How would they need to change their service? And then after that visualization, that then becomes easier then to say, okay, well, in that case, this product was a bit like that. This is what the forecasts on that looked like. Maybe we can say from that, you will get this kind of outcome. So it's a lot of uncertainty. And then, yes, I say simulation is definitely a go-to tool on it.
All right, yeah.
Okay, basically, it's now easy just to agree as a simulation expert. But however, maybe to stress the point a bit more, I assume that, of course, all the predictive analytics stuff has its limit, because basically it's it bases on historical data, and if you have some kind of structural break or black swan event, maybe from the perspective of a manufacturing company at least. Then of course here all the predictive stuff that we typically also do on an operational level has its clear limits. And on the other hand, what I see is, and I wanted to stress this with my little example, if we use some basic simulation functionalities for some kind of what if scenarios and how to behave in a certain case. and also on the impact of strategic decisions, maybe to link to this question as well. I generally would say that over the last 10 to 15 years, I see, from my personal experience, but I might have some bias here, that simulation becomes more important. So if you look at distribution centers, if you look at large new manufacturing sites, then I know very few projects that that come out without any simulation project on the forehand in order to optimize, to create to get sure about a certain amount of buffers that you need, about the number of forklifts or anything like this. And I would say that, for example, if we see the new setup of distribution centers, it's more or less some kind of standard. What I personally, I'm a bit more interested in bringing the simulation really in operational decisions, and here I see very few advantages or steps in that direction over the last, don't know, 5 to 10 years. But it's also there are a lot of problems in the area of the digital twin that really cope with data quality, data availability, data pre-processing in order to get this simulation running, in order to keep the simulation model on an actual level. So if you change something on the physical company, it has to be changed in the simulation model as well. So there are more really technical aspects that play an important role here, and not really, from my point of view, a question of acceptance or understanding. In most cases where people get to know a bit more about simulation, they see it as a beneficial tool, I would say.
Mm. So in summary, you're both agreeing that business analytics can be very helpful and is quite essential on both the strategic and operational level, but you have to also consider the human or soft factors that also impact business and society in general. So that actually leads over to a couple of questions that refer to how do we generate this data? How do we gain access to this more qualitative aspects, such as the culture or the motivation or creativity of employees? So do you have any insights on that topic?
So there are a lot of different methods to try to open up. So there are problem structuring methods. Problem structuring methods help you to open up a whole problem domain. There's things like action research, which help you to go in and work with people within a problem area, as opposed to working on a specific problem, and say, how do you want to change? Then you put the change in place and you see what happens. I don't think that's really helpful in this particular situation. I think we need to gain the qualitative data from things like, for instance, the subject matter expert, perhaps in the company, the guy who works in demand and knows what it looks like, and knows perhaps which companies were close to the wall and which ones weren't. So which customers you're likely to lose and which ones you're not. It's that kind of data right at the moment that I think is probably the most important stuff. And then that needs to be added to what you already know about how your business runs. That's the historical data from before CV-19 hit. So the problem with that, of course, is if you have one person's point of view, then that could be very biased data. The more people who you bring in and task, the less biased your data gets, because you have more different points of view. The idea of wisdom of crowds, I think, is probably quite important at this time. You try to bring as many subject matter experts together as you can, and talk to each other, and gather data from all of them. So things like the idea of grounded research, where you actually just talk and you take what everybody says and then you go through it with a fine-tooth comb and you actually code it to see what is recurring and what is happening again and again. That's actually pretty important right now, that kind of work, I think. I did quite a lot of my work based on that sort of theory, the idea of grounded analysis of what people were saying and what people were doing, bring that together with data, and that seemed to work quite well. So that's one suggestion. Oh, sorry, can I just add, sorry, Chris, I don't want to cut across, but when you were talking about modeling and how important it is to get the data right, one thing that a discussion that I had with my colleagues in simulation group in the UK was sometimes we don't need just a big overarching model, but we also need lots of small models looking at different aspects of the problem, and that each one of those small models can give us a different bit of information, and that actually sometimes when a complex situation is too big and complex, it's actually better to look through a variety of small models rather than trying to look through one large one. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Just to add, I made very different experience with especially in the consultancy projects when the people you talk to say, well, I have a feeling that we have a problem with a specific customer, and typically what we try to do in these cases is really also look, besides of course talking to the people, look at the data and try to see if we find a certain pattern, for example, and of course talk to other people, and then it's more or less a 50-50 decision. And in 50% of the cases, you could say, okay, this is true. There is a problem but this is not because of the customer, but it's because of the product, or it's because of a specific machine setting or something like this. And on the other hand, it's also the case that sometimes they say, okay, this might be just a bias because you look at the order and you see a specific customer name, and it's the same like the feeling that you're always at the worst cashier in the supermarket or something like this. However, if you really want to bring it on an operational level, in I would say 90-95% of the use cases that we are setting up, we are talking about data-driven decision support. So the people see this is very important for them, that a human is taking the final decision, and here also the bias comes into play again. Large companies, more from the west of the US, for example, have sometimes a bit different approach. So the guys from Google, for example, they really try to bring in the human, for example, in HR, to bring in the human factor, and the people have to quantify in a way their feeling about a certain candidate, and their quantified feeling, so to say, is brought into the entire process, but the entire process is in the end then data-driven. So they basically changed it, because sometimes you also the tool gives you a suggestion. This would be the best alternative. This would be the second best. This would be the third best. And then the human decision is, well, I go with the third best. And so this not in every case leads really then to the best decisions. And then they try to turn it around. But by doing this, typically they do some other mistakes. So in quantifying the data and how to rate it, what's the scale and what's the value, what's the percentage that a specific evaluation plays for the overall KPI and all this stuff. So you can do a lot of errors in here, and so the best thing from my experience is just talk to the people and
do a bit of both.
Yeah. All right. So unfortunately, we only have like 1 or 2 minutes left. So maybe just one quick last statement from both of you concerning the importance of human instinct, because you both referred to bias playing a role. You have the human who decides in the end and might take the third best option instead of the one that was chosen by the simulation. So what do you think is the importance of human instinct in the future in decision-making processes that are supported by industry analytics?
I think it's very important, but we have an awful lot of research on biases. So the critical thinking ability of the humans who are making those decisions is also really important. And to some extent, we can also smooth a certain amount of bias by having more than one subject matter expert and not going by the hippo decision, but actually saying, well, what does everybody think? And yeah, sure, the hippo might want to override it, but they will have to know that they override the decision of everybody. So, you know, at least it's clear, it's on the table, it's explicit. And I think yeah, that wouldn't be my personal take.
All right, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say KPI plus instinct is better than instinct alone.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I would be wrong in the things I'm doing. But
Yeah. Why have simulation?
but I guess, and on the other hand, we also have a lot of use cases where we stress not only on demonstrators but on a daily business that the data-driven support can really be beneficial, and that algorithm find other patterns that you don't know before, and all this stuff. So I guess there's really some value in it, but it's not the wisdom at all. So
Right.
it's only a part of the game.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Maybe to sum up it for you, Anna, but
yeah, you have to leave the summarizing to me. Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a good finishing note, I believe. So thank you both, Chris and Christina, for sharing your thoughts and insights today. I think everybody could take away some interesting and helpful facts and aspects, and I wish everybody good health in the current situation, and keep updated for the following webinar series events that will follow. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.